folks, and welcome to this week's show. My special guest today is Paul.
Hi.
And we're going to be focusing for the next 10 sessions, as it were, on the 1970s. For me, probably the greatest rock decade of all time, or music decade, irrespective. And we're going to be going through each year by year. For myself personally, obviously the 70s, I was a young boy, growing into a teenager. But for yourself, Paul, how was the 1970s for you? Obviously, it was a little bit different.
Interesting for me, I would say. I was 14 in 1970s, so I was trying to work out this morning. I was probably 15 before I really started to get into music. So I was kind of playing a little bit catch up with the albums that had come out the few years before that. But I think in 1970, I was still probably very much Top of the Pops was my main diet of music, my only diet of music. And then before I started actually buying albums, I think I'd maybe bought the odd single before that. I seem to remember buying Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum and a couple. I think I bought I actually bought Get Back by the Beatles which came out about when I was 15 as well, I think.
Yeah.
But other than that, for me, the change was 1971 when I started buying albums. But very much, buying albums from 70, 71. So slightly different for me than for you, but very interesting time musically.
Well, mine was odd because obviously my dad used to buy records every week for me, and then my brother when he came along in 70, and so he'd buy records every week, like singles. It was nearly singles, although he would buy himself albums every week. And if you're buying singles, he'd ask for what. But the first year I remember properly in terms of being massively into music, oddly, was 1972, and I remember like getting Slade's recent song Gary Glitter, Dare I Say It, and T-Rex, massively into all of that sort of stuff as a little kid. And the other big thing for me as well was the Beatles cartoons. I don't know if you remember the Beatles cartoon show. Me and my brother used to love it. We just used to watch it, the cartoons. It was always all the early hits, and it was just great. So I was always into music at a really, really young age, really young. It's just always been there, always been a big constant. So so this has been great for me. Going back to 1970 is a great year. Each year is massively loaded. So instead of doing 5 albums, we decided to go down the 10 album route. I'm sure we'll have different choices. 70 is a huge year. Politically, it was a big year. We had the Vietnam War going around in terms of worldwide with America. Of course, in this country, we had the government changing from Wilson to Heath. We had all various different things going on. We had the World Cup, which England probably had its best ever team and got knocked out by Germany. So, a big year, 1970, a very big year. Right, so we're going to go for our 10 best albums, and we've already agreed that we think each album is a 5-star album, so we're not going to rate them in terms of out of 5 because they're all classic albums to us. And to us, our thought was generally they're the albums that mean the most to us. So for some people, there'll be huge debates of why we've chosen them, but that's the whole purpose, sure. And there are some big albums missing, which we might talk about as we go through the show. So, Paul, I'll let you go first with your 10th choice. What have you gone in at number 10 in 1970?
Well, it's definitely very much a left field choice. I would say most of my choices are albums which I liked. As I say, around about the age of 14, 15. I'm guessing this album was probably a few years, maybe my later teens that I got into it. But the album is Daughter of Time by Colosseum.
Oh, right. Wasn't expecting that. I
knew you were. Which it's just an album that ever since I first heard it has really stuck with me, and it's a fantastic album. And it's not really. I mean, other people will talk about other Colosseum albums as being better than that, but I just love this album. Musically, the compositions on it are fantastic. Great, just a great supergroup. I mean, they weren't really fusion, I suppose. They were a rock band with a kind of jazz tinge to them. But you had John Heisman on drums, Dave Greenslade on keyboards, Chris Farlow. A very distinctive voice of Chris Farlow, but for me the kind of icing on the cake was Clem Clemson playing guitar.
Right.
And this album, for me, it's just got some fantastic compositions on it. A great version of Theme for an Imaginary Western, which is Jack Bruce, Pete Brown's song. It's been covered by a lot of people, but a very dramatic version on that, which I really like. And then there's some, I mean, to be honest, the highlight for me is the guitar playing of Clem Clemson, who I went on to follow his career, seeing him play with Humble Pie. Obviously, most people talk about Peter Frampton, but Clemson was a great guitarist who followed Frampton, and he played with Jack Bruce and other people as well. And I got to see Clem Clemson not that long ago playing up in a little club in Fife with the bass player from Colosseum. Trying to think his first name, Clark. Anyway, but just a great guitarist who's had a really interesting career. But it's just such a really good album. I mean, some of the guitar playing on it, and there's some really bluesy stuff on there as well. A track called Downhill in Shadows, which is Dick Hextall-Smith and Clem Clemson playing together. And it's just like, you just hear the intro and it's like, wow. If you haven't heard that album, I would thoroughly recommend to go back and listen to it.
I'm going to check it out because I used to have Colosseum 2 with Gary Moore on guitar.
Right, okay.
So yeah, I'm going to go and check that out.
I mean, the only track on it I could live without is there's a track called Time Machine, which is an 8-minute drum solo by John Heisman, who is a beast of a drummer. But unless it's John Bonham or Gavin Harrison, I'm not really that interested in drum solos, to be honest. You know, so maybe Ginger Baker, but other than that, no. I'd probably go to the bar for a beer when the drums are playing.
Yeah, as do most of us.
Yeah, but it's really an interesting. As I say, I know it's very people say that. I mean, nobody would think of that being top 10, but it's an album that sneaks in for me because it just stayed with me. It's been an album which kind of it's had the longevity where I still listen to it today. You know.
No, that's the whole purpose of this show as well, is to sort of maybe introduce new albums to people as well.
Yeah.
And just it's obviously it's what's personal to individuals, rather than just the same old, as it were, really.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Right. Well,
so,
my number 10 is Tumbleweed Connection by Elton John. I absolutely love it. I think it's a fabulous album. Recorded at Trident with Gus Dudgeon on sort of production values. It's got loads of famous musicians on it, though. I mean, it's got the introduction of Nigel Olsson on it, and it's got Herbie Flowers on it, Dusty Springfield on backing vocals. So it's fantastic, and it's just a terrific album. It's like an album that the band could have made. It's got that real Americana influence about it, and I think Elton and Bernie said that they were massively influenced by the band, and it's got that sort of real groove to it. There's no real hit singles on it, so it's not one of those albums that sometimes gets mentioned too much. It's always Goodbye Yellow Brick Road or whatever, you know. This for me should be mentioned a lot more. It's a fabulous album. Country Comfort, if I recall rightly, Rod Stewart did a great version of it on Gasoline Alley, which actually could have made my top 10. It was very close to being included. And it was released before Elton's version, which is rather bizarre. It's just a super album. It's got a really beautiful feel, a really lovely groove to it, all top draw songs. Just highly recommend it. Go and listen to it. It's almost like a little concept album. Fabulous, just a fabulous album. So that's my 10th choice, number 10. Okay, how about what you got in at number 9?
This is a bit of an exception to the rest in the sense that this is an album I would never really have dreamt to listen to back when I was 14, 15, but I would definitely play it now, and that's Sex Machine by James Brown, which is, I mean, it was one of those albums which was, groundbreaking in many ways. It was James Brown at the peak of his creative powers. I mean, speaking as a bass player, when I listen to bands, generally I'm always listening to rhythm sections and bass players in particular. I mean,
Bootsy's on bass, isn't he?
Bootsy on bass, Clyde Stubblefield on drums, the JB horns. It's just a phenomenal. I mean, I was listening to it this morning. I haven't heard it for a long time, and Bootsy's just off the leash on that album. It's fantastic. And I'm not one of these people who's my wife will say I'm the most reluctant person to get up on the dance floor ever. But if James Brown comes on, I'm up like that. Even now, it's just like James Brown, we've got to get up and dance, you know. But anything else, not a chance, you know. But I did actually. I mean, it was on my bucket list to see James Brown, and I probably thought I would never actually manage it. But I did see him at the Sage in Gateshead in 2005, and I have to. I mean, I think sadly he died the year after, within about 5 or 6, I think 6 months after that. So I just managed to see him in the Lord. But I mean, he was he was 72 at that stage. He wasn't as energetic as he was, and he would do a couple of songs and he'd have a break, and then the backing singers would do it. But that was the tightest band that I've ever seen. The only band that I ever saw that came remotely close to them was Tower of Power, who were hugely influenced by James Brown. In fact, they wrote a song saying, I forget what it's called, but it was a reference to James Brown, you know. So, absolutely amazing band. And as I say, the forerunner to so many other things. Other things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been for James Brown. Most sampled artist in history, I think.
I mean, it's a great album. It didn't make my top 10, but it was very, very close. I mean, he features probably my top 10 favorite artists, to be brutally honest. It was just unbelievable. When I was a kid, in the early days of the band, I tried to learn how to do this sort of splits thing and knock the mic stand through your legs and that, you know. It was bloody hard work. Like, I used to just watch him in slow motion and try and learn all the moves. He was absolutely great. There was this great old documentary when he was in Zaire in '74, which obviously was the Alley gig. And I used to watch it and sort of just play it back bit by bit. It was just fabulous. The band were unreal. I mean, he was horrible. Apparently, he was a horrible man to the band. He would fine them all the time. And, Bootsy was only in the band for 18 months. Him and his brother were only in the band for 18 months. So, great album. Honestly, it's a super album. Dead close. I actually looked for one of his albums, which was like a sort of compilation thing that they brought, but I think it comes out in '71. So that might feature on the next one for me.
All right, yeah. Cool.
But great, absolutely great. Well, my number 9, we've discussed this one, is Highway by Free, released December 1970. I even preferred over Fire and Water. I've stated before, it's probably got the worst album sleeve ever in terms of promoting a band, because it doesn't. It just has the word Highway written on, and everyone assumed that the band was called Highway, and it probably cost them. It could have cost them superstardom, really, after the success of Fire and Water. Great album. Again, but a bit like Elton's album, it's massively influenced by the band. The album is drenched in melancholia. The musicianship on it is unbelievably good. I mean, Andy Fraser, what a bass player he is. You know, on the Steeler and songs like that, he's just absolutely outstanding. There are some really just unbelievable songs in it. Be My Friend, you know, Roger's pleading in that soulful blues voice that he's got for a 20-year-old lad is just ridiculous to be that good. Sunny Day, lovely. Riding on a Pony, one of the big ones, if you like. Love You So is probably my favorite song on the album. And again, another driving song, and it pleads, and the band are really motoring, but there's still, even in the motoring moments, there are still loads of space around, and Kossoff's guitars, and the whole band are just unbelievable musicians, incredible musicians. I love the song Bodie, Soon I'll Be Gone, another belter. So for me, I mean, it's odd because I've got this in at number 9, and this could have been number 1 or 2. Any one of them I could have flipped around. I think it was just on my mood of the day, and I've got it in number 9, which feels really harsh because it's an absolute stone cold classic. So for me, number 9, Highway. What have you got at number 8?
Number 8. Well, it's maybe cheating a little bit, but I felt I couldn't miss it out, and it's Woodstock. I had to include the Woodstock album, and also because there was a number of artists that was struggling to get into my top 10, and I thought if I put the Woodstock album in, it will take them off. I mean, people like I nearly put in Abraxas by Santana, which is great. But the Woodstock soundtrack's got Soul Sacrifice, and bear in mind that Santana were just a young band at that time as well. You know, Michael Shreve on drums, unbelievable. And you know, obviously other amazing performance as well. Joe Cocker,
Mad Dog's an Englishman.
And my story about that is that I was absolutely obsessed with the Who when I was 14, 15. But I lived about 20 miles out of Glasgow, and I basically had to get the bus into Glasgow. I remember going on my own on a wet afternoon, got the bus into Glasgow. So in those days, it was a big deal, a 15-year-old getting a bus into Glasgow on his own. And the main reason I went was to see the Who and their songs in Woodstock, and just that moment when they're doing "See Me, Feel Me," it's just like one of those great rock moments that was captured on celluloid. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I just remember sitting being absolutely awestruck watching that, you know. And then obviously Hendrix, Star Spangled Banner. I mean, nobody's ever done anything like that before. And again, it was just one of those iconic moments. So I mean, the quality, you know, you could argue with the sound quality of the album and all this, but for me, as an album which summed up a period of time, Woodstock was absolutely on it in terms of what was going on at that time, you know. 10 years after as well, I'm Going Home, Alvin Lee, you know, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember watching that and being amazed at how fast a guitar player he was. Yeah, I was dead impressed with Alvin Lee, yeah.
Even there's a bit when they're building the stage, and it's Wooden Ships by Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I love that song. And every time I hear that song, I can see that in my mind. It's just see it in my head, that bit when they're building the stage and all this stuff. And it's like just fabulous, you know. Some great songs, you know, Richie Havens as well, you know.
Yeah. Well, when I used to have the record shop, I used to have a woman who used to come in and ask for Richie Havens albums all of the time, just constantly coming. I knew as soon as she walked through the door, I knew she was going to ask. Yeah, Richie Havens.
Richie Havens. But
so
no,
yeah,
even better they've got it on DVD. You can watch it, and you know. But
yeah, that's a great choice. Actually, that's a really great choice. Well, my number 8 is Lindisfarne, Nicely Out of Tune, which I think is just a great album. You know what's really weird? I've only gotten into it in the last 6 months, which is crazy, isn't it? Just got into it in the last 6 months, and there's a few Lindisfarne things I've got. It was really bizarre. When I was a little boy, we lived in this absolute slum in Newcastle called Sutton Dwellings in Benwell, and we lived for the very early part of my life, and we lived upstairs to Alan Hull's mum. So when I was a little kid, Alan Hull's one of his daughters used to come and knock on us, and we used to go down and play in Alan Hull's mother's house, which is a bit bizarre. And you'd see Alan in all of the time. He'd nobody got a guitar and a fag in his hand. The room was always like a fog of smoke.
Alan Hull's absolute genius, Alan Hull. Have you seen the documentary? I haven't seen the documentary.
The documentary is absolutely brilliant, and it's the documentary that's got me into Lindisfarne recently. You know, I always had Fog on the Tyne and loved it, but it's that documentary that's really got us into him. I mean, his solo album, which will come to in another year, is unbelievable.
Pipe Dream is one of my favorite.
Dream.
Oh, absolutely fantastic.
Incredible album. Really is an incredible album. But yeah, Nice Out of Tune. It came out in 1970. It was a big hit. I mean, they were the big band, weren't they, on Charisma? You know, they did the tour with Genesis, and who's the other band again? It was the big keyboard band. Forgotten now. Van der Graaf Generator, wasn't it? Which is a bizarre trio of acts to have on, you know. and they were just massive. I mean, they're such a great live band. But when you listen to this album, it's absolutely incredible album. It's really moving. Lady Eleanor, one of the most beautiful songs ever created. Again, that wistful feel to it. I love the little phone sound in the background. It's beautifully recorded. The production is superb on it. There again, my link back to the band is also here, because in the documentary, I think it was mentioned that Lindisfarne were like the British band, and I think that's an absolutely perfect analogy. I think it really is, because each member of the band has, or just about, has a song on the album. Of course, Alan Hull's the main songwriter and a genius, in my opinion. I mean, but each member of the band has really good songs on it. But there are some real standouts. I mean, obviously, Lady Eleanor's incredible. Winter Song is one of the greatest. greatest songs ever written.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And my
sorry, I wish I'd thought of that. I didn't realise it came out in 1970. My bad. I love it, and you're right. These songs are absolutely winter songs, just fantastic. You know?
Yeah, it's just an amazing album, and Clear White Light is my wake-up call in the morning on my phone. It's unbelievable, the harmonies on it. You're just proud to call them a Geordie band. You really are. It's great. We Can Swing Together, of course. It's got a really amusing tale. Go and listen to it and you'll understand. Just a fabulous album, top album, 5-star album all day long for me. And it keeps out some really great albums. So, for example, I've not got Bridge Over Troubled Water in this collection, which I feel really bad for not having in. Or Van Morrison's, and it's like, oh, why can't I get them in? And I couldn't, because this is for me even better again. So anybody watching, go out and listen to it. Nicely out of tune, Lindisfarne. Outstanding album.
Great choice. Great choice.
So there we go. That's my number 8. What have you got in at number 7, Paul?
Number 7, I've got Band of Gypsies. I mean, I love Hendrix. I would probably say it's not my favourite Hendrix album, but it's a great album. And actually, it's an album I've not listened to for a long time, and I went back to listen to it yesterday. I used to think it was quite a intense, kind of heavy album, but it's actually not. I mean, obviously, Machine Gun is the kind of classic anti-war and sort of Hendrix song, and the guitar playing in it. It's just the sounds he gets out his guitar and that are just incredible, you know. But it's a very soulful. It kind of signalled a kind of change in direction for Hendrix a little bit when, you know, he had Billy Cox on bass and Buddy Miles on drums, and there was definitely a move towards a kind of more soulful, kind of soul R&B groove to what they were doing, which comes across. I mean, obviously, Buddy Miles, 2 of his songs on that album, and he actually sings 2 of them as well, which is a kind of step away from what had gone before, but. It's just a great album, you know, and it kind of, you know, I mean, Hendrix died later on that year. You just wonder what he might have gone on to, you know, produce after that, because he was always looking at new directions, and just a great all-round Hendrix album. I was so pleased to go back and revisit it this week because I hadn't heard it for a while, but I couldn't possibly miss out my list of my top 10. You know, it's just
there's lots of ifs and whats, isn't there, with Hendrix? Because I mean, there's lots of other subsequent albums of what they thought the next Hendrix album was going to be. There's one that came out a few years ago. It was really excellent, actually, with Freedom and all the rest of it on. Really great album, really superbly put together. But we don't know. Nobody knows. And it's, as you say, we're all just surmising and having a guess. I messaged you the other week with a Hendrix story, didn't I? The fact that my mum met him once.
That was an amazing story, that. I loved that. All she mentioned was the fact he was wearing weird clothes or something.
Yeah, like some weird guy, some black guy wearing weird clothes. Because for the people watching, my mum used to babysit for Chas Chandler's kids in the late 60s. In Newcastle, who was obviously the bass player of the Animals and manager of Hendrix and Slade, and there you go. It was a bizarre story. Right, my number 7, and this is an odd one because it was released in the USA in 1970 and in the UK in 71, but we've gone with whatever the earliest releases because I think that's the way it should be. When did it come out first is the way I look at it. And it's The Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie. This really could easily be 1 or 2 for me, but I've got it down at 7 at the minute. It should be higher, really, but I've got it down at 7. It's just for various reasons, but it's a great album. It's a really unusual album because his previous album had been Space Oddity, which is this beautiful folk rock album, and this one is totally the opposite. It's a really heavy rock album. It's the heaviest album he ever goes on to do, actually. It's heavier than Ziggy Stardust by quite a bit. And it's mainly down to Mick Ronson. This really is almost like a Mick Ronson album. It just features Ronson right at the front, quite rightly so, because he was a genius. And it's almost like the first version, if you like, of the Spiders. You've got Woody Woodmansey on drums, Ronno on guitar, but you've got Tony Visconti instead of Trevor Bolder on bass. but he's on bass and production duties and does a great job. His bass playing superb, really good bass player. The production's great because Visconti's just a superb engineer. There are arguments that this Bowie's got the least amount of sort of interest or effort in some respects on this album, although he's subsequently later said this was not the case at all. But the big argument is that Ronson and Visconti tended to do all the arrangements and the production, and Bowie would dip in with the songs and then with the vocals. But that's all up to debate. There's a theme throughout the album, and that is the theme of sanity or insanity as well. It's prevalent throughout the album. Links to Bowie's fear that he would develop schizophrenia like his half brother Terry. And of course, that comes in later on with the album Aladdin Sane, which is obviously a pun, a lad insane, you know. So that's something that's clearly, you know, prevalent to him in his mind constantly. It's some great songs on it. Width of a Circle is a proper hard rocker, really great song. The guitar's magnificent, even better live. If you watch the Ziggy Stardust final concert, it's incredible live. Great sort of fight off, if you like, between Ronson and Boulder on it. But this is a great version. There's psychodramatic songs like All the Madmen and After All. The song title itself, The Man Who Sold the World, is magnificent. People remember it more now for the Nirvana version, which always saddens me, but Bowie's version's, for me, the definitive version. I do love the Lulu version. I think it's great. And again, I think the Spiders are the backing band on it. Some of the other standout tracks, She Shook Me Cold is really an old song that just features Ronson doing his sort of Jeff Beck style guitar playing. And then finally, the last song, The Superman, influenced by the literary works of Friedrich Nietzsche, which again is another superb song. It's a great album. I've got it at 7, probably too low if I'm being honest, but I've got it in it. It's a fantastic album, and it's weird because it's so different to what would subsequently come next with Hunky Dory, and so different to Space Oddity. If it had come just before Ziggy Stardust, you could see why, but this is sort of almost like an odd album. It's almost like an oddly placed album. Terrific album though. So that's mine. Paul, what have you got in at number 6?
Number 6, I've got Deep Purple and Rock, which back in the day when I was 15 and I was at school, the thing was you would buy obviously vinyl albums in those days, and you would walk around at school. It was almost like a badge you wore. This is like the music you listen to. So everybody would walk around with an album under their arm, and it would be Deep Purple or whatever, you know, Black Sabbath or whatever. And I remember I bought Deep. There was no record shops within 15-20 miles of where I lived. I got it from my mum's catalogue, which was like probably a Little Women's catalogue or something like that, which they basically ordered it. I probably was paying up like, you know, £5 a week or something. I don't know, but that's where I got it from, and that was one of the first albums I bought, Deep Purple and Rock, and it's just an unbelievable album. I mean, you know, absolute pioneers of heavy metal, hard rock, whatever you want to call it. And I mean, it was the first album by Mark II, Deep Purple, which was the definitive Deep Purple lineup. You could argue that other permutations later on were decent, but to me, this lineup with Gillan, Blackmore, etc., was the. It's the
definitive version for me as well. The next version's very good, but it's not the same.
It's not the same, no. But I mean, you know, you put on Deep Purple and Rock, and from the first notes of Speed King, it was just this frenzy of noise, and straight away you know what you're going to get, and it's absolutely relentless, that album. There's no light and shade in that at all, and I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just like full on, sort of pin your ears back, and you know, there's no let up at all. You know, there's some absolutely fantastic tracks. Like Traveling Time, obviously, is the only one where the tempo maybe changes a bit, but then you've got Gillan and Blackmore absolutely at their peak on that. I mean, Blackmore's solo in that is just absolutely one of my favourite Blackmore solos. I'm a great fan of Richie Blackmore. Yeah. He was one badass guitarist, you know, he really was back in the day.
I would argue they're probably, of all the great rock bands, people forget there were probably 4 massive rock bands in the very, very early 70s, and they were one of them. And they never get mentioned now. It's really odd, isn't it? You know, and when we talk about great musicians, Blackmore rarely gets mentioned. Gillan was an incredible singer at the time. I mean, Child in Time as a singer, try and hit them notes. You know, good luck.
Well,
you know.
I played in a band when I was 15, 16, and I'm going out to Spain next week. I'm still friendly with the guitarist in the band, and I'm actually going out to see him next week. And the two of us shudder when we think about it, because when we played in a band when we were 15, we used to do Child in Time, and we actually did that in public, and the two of us absolutely cringe. How we ended up there, but the audacity to try and even attempt that song just makes me shudder, you know. What it must have been like to listen to it, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But no, just absolutely fantastic album. Blackmore's guitar tone on that album was just incredible. It's probably better. He's got a dirtier sound than he had on Fireball and Machine Head. Just a fabulous album, and you know, those next three albums, that one and the next two, to me were just like Deep Purple at the top, absolute top of the game, you know.
I agree. I'll be honest, I forgot it was on the list. It would have been my list otherwise. Definitely. And Pace, I think he's probably my favourite rock drummer.
Great drummer.
Again, doesn't get as mentioned anywhere near enough as he should do, because he can do anything.
Yeah, he was a fantastic drummer. I mean, Roger Glover was a great all-round musician. A bit like I think he didn't get a lot of credit, but a bit like John Paul Jones was he was the kind of unsung hero of Deep Purple as well in terms of arrangements and production and stuff like that. But you know, he seemed to be quite content to be in the background. And then you've got two massive egos in that band. I mean, which is the sort of main problem they ever had was with Blackmore and Gillan just butting heads the whole time. You know, I think they were both pretty obnoxious people, but you know, they produced some great music. But I mean, there's a lot of obnoxious people in music who produce great work. So you know,
well, I mean, you can imagine Blackmore being really hard work. I mean, just by the amount of musicians he's had in the bands tells you that he's a tough gig, I think is the phrase. But Gillan, great singer though, and people should check out Jesus Christ Superstar on. I think it's the album he's on. He's the singer on it, you know, and he's singing at times is just it's incredible. Right, well, speaking of teenage bands, this next album was massive for me, and that's The Who live at Leeds. And I'll just first of all would like to say that if this had all of the tracks on, which would subsequently come out in 2001 and then later again, this would be number one for me quite comfortably. But it's got 6 tracks on it, and it demotes it because of it. It was originally 6 tracks recorded at Leeds Uni. They'd famously recorded the Hull gig and didn't realise that they thought there was a fault on it, and loads of stories about it. They thought it wasn't recorded properly. It turned out it was just the first 5 songs didn't have the bass on, and they've subsequently re-released that. I still think the Leeds gig is better slightly though. I don't know why. The Hull gig sounds a little better, but I think the playing is just a little bit better again at Leeds. It also special for me because I went to Leeds Uni, so I've been in that refectory, been on the stage, stood on it where they've actually played. It's bizarre because it's like a little L shape. And it's an odd album, the original album from 1970, because it's like 3 covers and three songs of theirs, you know. So the covers, you know, Summertime Blues and Shaking All Over. And then, of course, Mose Allison's sort of incredible song of incendiary version of Young Man Blues. And going back to being a young boy at 15 or whatever, my first ever gig, we did Young Man Blues. So we did Young Man Blues and My Generation. I'd love to see what people thought of that. Like, it was probably terrible. But yeah, they were just massive for me. They were my band. They're still my favorite band. It's just an incredible album. The 14-minute version of My Generation with the improvisation is out of this world. The drumming by Moon, different level stuff really. The band are incredible. And again, it's a different version to the night before. If you go and listen to Live at Hull now, which is available, it's a totally different version. So they did literally make it up as they went along, which just shows you how tight they were as a band. like a jazz band that could go off in different areas and they could look at each other, and Entwistle and Moon would know. I mean, Townsend held the band together almost through playing the rhythm, where Entwistle would be flying all over on the bass. He was like a lead bass player. Moon was like a lead drummer, you know, and Townsend was the rhythm section of the band, and Daugherty was a superb rock vocalist. It's just a band at their peak of their game. I mean, for me, The Who were probably at their peak between 69 and 75. I genuinely think they're the greatest live band of all time. I think they were unsurpassable when they were really at it. And it's just an incredible album with really quite unusual selection of covers. Shaking All Over is not a song you'd expect to see on an album. Their version of Summertime Blues is brilliant. It's a top draw album. It's when you got the original album, it had all the inserts, didn't it? You know, you had the contracts and various things. I remember having the poster on my wall with the Maximum R&B poster and all of that. It was a really well produced album in terms of the whole package. It was great. It's just an unbelievable album. It's, again, as I say, if it had the full concert now, it would be number one. It would be my number one choice quite comfortably. It's that good an album. So for number 6 for me, it's The Who live at Leeds. Paul, what have you got at number 5?
I've got On the Boards by Taste. Absolutely. I mean, Rory Gallagher, what an amazing guitar player. I think I kind of, one of the first albums I got from my mum's catalogue, along with Deep Purple and Rock, was the first Taste album with a horrible black and orange cover, which by comparison to On the Boards, it's a very raw album. I mean, I guess you could say the same. Led Zeppelin's first album, Free's first album, were kind of very raw electric blues, and you know the original Taste album was very much like that, I think. And then On the Boards is just completely different. You know, it's got some great rockers on it, like What's Going On and tracks like that. But then you've got some amazing, really jazzy tracks in that. You know, it's happened before, it'll happen again. And the title track On the Boards. I mean, another thing is that for Rory Gallagher fans who maybe haven't delved back to listen to Taste, Gallagher plays sax on that album. He plays sax on 2 tracks, and it's absolutely amazing, absolutely fantastic sax player. I mean, the sax playing on those 2 tracks is really good. And what I don't know, I never really found out is why he never really picked sax up again after that. I'm not aware of him playing sax in any albums after that. But Taste were an amazing band. I mean, 1968, when Free had their farewell concert at Royal Albert Hall, the 2 support bands were Taste and Yes. I mean, can you imagine what a lineup that was, you know?
Yeah, because Rory's as good as Clapton every day of the week for me at that gig. You know?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think there was already tension starting to sort of to come to a head, and when they recorded On the Boards, because I think I'm right in saying they split up later in 1970. I think there was a lot of jealousy amongst Richie McCracken and the bass player John Wilson. I think there was, from what I gather, there was a lot of jealousy about Gallagher getting the limelight. But he was the main man. He wrote all the songs. There's just some great guitar playing in that, as you'd expect from Rory. But just a great breadth of material as well. You know, the kind of blues rock things, as I say, like What's Going On. But just a really good range of stuff in there. Really, I love the jazz feel he had in the album, but he never really went in that direction much after that. He kind of went back towards the more mainstream after when he went solo. But it was just, for me, it was just a great album, which it's one of my all-time favorites. I would never. I would always be in my top 10. If anyone who hasn't heard it, who's heard Rory Gallagher, I would fully recommend going back and listening to that album, just to understand the breadth of his genius in terms of, you know, great sax player as well as a great songwriter, great singer, great guitarist. So yeah, definitely one to look out.
Yeah, he's one of my top 10 guitarists without a shadow of a doubt. And interestingly, Brian May is a huge fan of Rory. And there's a lovely documentary clip that I watched recently where he talks about Rory for about 20 minutes, and he said he got the amp sound because he noticed Rory had a Vox, and also the sort of treble boost again off Rory, and he was sort of massively influenced by his tone and his playing. He's a huge fan of Taste. So yeah, Rory, absolutely top draw. He may well feature in future years for me. Number 5, I've got the Stooges Funhouse. It's the sort of proto-punk mix of punk, sleaze, a little jazzy, but not really. But it's just such an unusual album. It's like a real freeform at times. It's such a bizarre album. The whole album was recorded live. They originally tried to separate each instrument, and the band didn't like the sound. It was too polished. So they literally removed all the barriers and just literally recorded it live with Iggy and a microphone in his hand, which is unheard of in a studio. And you can hear it. The band are playing live all the way through it. And it's got that movement and the emotions. I mean, you've got the real sort of punky type songs, you know, like TBI, Down the Street, Loose, all great songs. My favourite song on the album is Dirt. It's one of the greatest sleazy tunes of all time. It's, again, going back to Free, it's got this beautiful drum groove going on by Scott Ashton on drums. It's magnificent. Lovely bit of bass on it, and just loads of space with Ron playing over the top on guitar, Ron Ashton a little bit, and Iggy's voice just dominates, but there's space everywhere, and it's really, really powerful. It's an incredible song. I mean, the influence of the album is massive. The Damned went on and covered I Feel Alright on their debut album, Damn, Damn, Damn. So it shows you how big an influence they have on it. It really is an amazing album. I mean, TBI, Iggy does still to this day, I think, you know, you'll still do tracks off it. 1970 and whatever. It's a fabulous album, a real groundbreaker. And you'll notice there's 2 or 3 of my albums in my top 10 I would describe as groundbreaking albums. And this is definitely one of them, because it's almost the sound of the future in terms of what's going to happen a little bit later on, which ironically, of course, Iggy sort of has moved on by the time punk rock comes around. But yeah, it's definitely a massive influence for punk albums, and I love it. I think it's a great album. I was just playing it before. I absolutely love it. So for number 5 for me, there was the Stooges Funhouse. What have you got at number 4, Paul?
Number 4, I've got Black Sabbath's first album. I mean, I know the Paranoid also came out in 1970, about 8 months later. I mean, they were very prolific at that time, and a lot of people, that seemed to be the more popular album, you know, looking back. But to me, you've got to go right back to the first album, to the album where you first came across that sound that Black Sabbath had, you know. And for me, if there was ever an album where the artwork was absolutely the right artwork for an album, it was the Black Sabbath first album, the gatefold cover with the picture of the graveyard and the kind of shadowy figure in the background and the headstones. And then you put on that first track, which is the title track, and you've got like 40 seconds or so of just rain.
Yeah.
And then they come in with that first chord, and there's bells and everything. And then it's just that then when Ozzy comes in, and it's just like that whole kind of just a kind of whole feeling of doom and destruction and foreboding is just, which goes right through the whole album. But it's funny, go back to when that first came out. I mean, even in the 70s, Black Sabbath were hammered by the critics. You know, they were absolutely hammered. You know, they were seen as a bit of a novelty band, and you know, even though they sold something like 8 million albums in the 70s, the critics never really took them seriously. You know, there was Led Zeppelin were up there on a pedestal, rightly so. Deep Purple were, but Black Sabbath seemed to have to fight a corner an awful lot more for any kind of credibility. Which is, I mean, looking back now, everybody's like, you know, Rolling Stone have kind of celebrated them as one of the greatest bands of all time. And I was reading, I think it was Rob Halford, Iron Maiden this morning. I was reading about. He said they were up. He said that Black Sabbath were up with Beatles and Mozart in terms of what they did for heavy metal. You know, and he's probably right. You know, with that album, as I said, you know, it's the title track, and then I think a lot of people just thought they were just a heavy metal riff band and nothing else. But Tony Iommi is a fantastic guitar player. There's some great guitar playing in that album. I was listening to it this morning, and there's a track, one of the later tracks, and it's just like almost like a 10-minute guitar solo. And just like, wow, what amazing guitar playing. And then you've got Geezer Butler as a very underrated bass player as well. Speaking again as a bass player, I thought he was such a fantastic bass player. He's got that lovely fluid feel to the way he plays, you know. And then you've got Bill Ward, who's an absolute beast of a drummer. I mean, he could really swing, but it wasn't
he could swing really, possibly better than anybody else at that time. And we talk about great rock drummers, and there was a plethora of great rock drummers from Birmingham. I mean, or that area, the Midlands, you know, you've got Bonham, obviously. Bill Ward, probably the best in terms of swing. And then, of course, at pace as well, you know, Bev Bevan. And you've got a huge selection of really great drummers. An incredible array of drummers from that area. And they were all magnificent, really exceptional drummers. It's bizarre. Same with guitar players, of course, as well, from that area as well, and vocalists.
Yeah, I mean, you think I mean, the fact he could play as well as he did when he lost the ends of two of his fingers was just quite remarkable, you know. But I'm glad that they got the respect that deserve. I mean, that obviously had a massive cult following for years now, but you know, it took them a long time to get respect of sort of music press and what have you, you know, critics. But
it's a great album. Because originally he was in Jethro Tull for a very short while as well, wasn't he? And in fact, I think he's on the Rock and Roll Circus video as the guitarist in Jethro Tull.
Right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, he was talking of him joining Jethro Tull. Yeah.
But as you say before, he literally lost his fingertips before he was going to go off and do some sort of recording or whatever, and so he had to change his style. He said in his book, he would have switched to become a right-handed guitarist in hindsight. He used his leather jacket to make these fingernail things, you know, the ends of his tips. But because of him, we now have detuning. We now have different different gauge strings. So he's got an awful lot in terms of he so rarely gets enough mentions in terms of what he's done for the guitar.
Really, no,
incredible.
I mean, I actually prefer that album to Paranoid. I think I bought Paranoid before I bought this album, but this is the album I still go back to, and I just put on that first track, Turn It Up Loud, and it's just like, yeah, that's the Black Sabbath I remember. You know, that's what really gets me. You know.
Well, I agree with you because I think Nib is unbelievable, and their cover of Evil Woman it wasn't on the American version, I don't think, is great. It's The Wizard's great. It's a fantastic album. I agree. I think it is a better album.
I mean, again, talking about light and shades. You know, Sleeping Village kind of lulls you into the false sense of security. It's a nice kind of like acoustic beginning to it, but after a few seconds, it's just like they're off again. You know. Yeah. Great stuff. It's a bit of a jazzy tinge to some of their stuff as well. I think sometimes as well.
Massively.
Maybe that's Bill Ward. I think coming, you know, that's the drum style coming through. Yep. But you know, I read something recently talking about Dio. You know, Dio being a better singer in Black Sabbath than Ozzy. But nah, for me, Black Sabbath is Ozzy Osbourne. Without Ozzy, it's not Black Sabbath. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it would.
See, I love Heaven and Hell. It's a great album. It's but it's different. It is different. It would certainly be in my top 3 or 4 Sabbath albums, but it's a totally different type of album. It's it is a different type of Sabbath. It's but a great version nonetheless. Right. Well, my number 4 is Led Zeppelin 3. Which again is just an incredible album, and again this could probably be higher, as could any of them. I mentioned this before on the Led Zeppelin show. Go and watch it and find out what our favorite Led Zeppelin albums are on our channel, so please subscribe and go and check it out. I think this is an incredible album, just all start to finish. The musicianship's great. some people describe it as the acoustic album. But although oddly, of course, it doesn't start anywhere near acoustic because it belts in with the Immigrant Song, you know, in full Viking invasion mode, and Plant with that ridiculous high voice, which is just, you know, it's come on, I'll take the lot of you, sort of register. Amazing intro, proper classic hard rock tune. But we've seen before about metal. I think you've seen before there, that Sabbath album is the first metal album. Led Zeppelin are not, for me, a metal band. They're a great hard rock band, classic rock, but I never see them as a metal band, whereas Sabbath cross both bands, classic rock and metal, and that's the first metal album for me, is that Sabbath album, without a shadow of a doubt. Going back to Zeppelin, some great songs, Friends, Out on the Tiles, all great. Since I've Been Loving You, one of my favorite ever songs. Page's guitars, fantastic on it. The whole, again, back to that light and shade thing. There's loads on that whole song, light and shade. All the way through, it's brilliant. Gallows Pole, marvelous. Tangerine, lovely. What a lovely song that is. Should have been a Crosby, Stills and Nash song. That's the Way. Finish, you know, Bron-Y-Aur Stomp. The whole thing is outstanding, and it's my favorite Led Zeppelin art sleeve as well. I love this sleeve. It's fantastic sleeve. Really love it. So yeah, that's for me. There we go at number 4, Led Zeppelin 3. Outstanding album.
I had the original Led Zeppelin 3 on vinyl with the spinny round thing.
Spinny round thing, yeah. I used to love that, you know.
I wish I did. I've got it on CD now, but no, I don't know where the vinyl went. But
I love the plum vinyl insert as well on the middle as well. It's beautiful. Wow. Yeah. They were great looking records.
Yeah.
What have you got at number 3 then? The big 3.
Number 3, I've got Fire and Water by Free, obviously. Yeah, great album. I could easily go on with Highway, but Fire and Water to me is just my all-time one of my all-time favorite albums. There's just some amazing songs in that. You know, cross off one of my probably top 5 guitarists. Just absolutely love the guy's style and his sound and the emotion he rung out the guitar. Andy Fraser, you mentioned before, what an amazing bass player he was. Amazing all-round musician. Because one of my favourite songs in that is Heavy Load, which features Andy Fraser on piano prominently. And it's not something they did live that often, I don't think, but I heard a version just last night. I was listening to one. There was a version, I think it was one of these bootleg tapes from Stockholm, I think, which was interesting, but the guitar playing on it was very, very subdued. It wasn't anywhere near as good as the guitar playing on the studio version of it, you know. But I mean, on the album, you've got tracks like, you know, Mr. Big. Obviously, the famous version of that is probably the live version, but just a great song, you know. Again, featuring Andy Fraser's bass playing, really good stuff. And again, you mentioned before about the space of the musicians, just before them sort of allow for each other to sort of breathe, sort of play into, as it were. It's just fantastic, you know. Very uncluttered sound a lot of the time, which is one of the things I really liked about them. But no, just a great album with some absolutely fantastic tracks on it. So it would absolutely have to be in my top 10. An album I couldn't be without.
Yeah, well, my number 3 is Black Sabbath. So we've covered everything basically that we had to say about it. I was going to go with Paranoid, but I was really unsure because there's some stuff on Paranoid that the whole thing's a great album as well. You know, like War Pigs, obviously the sort of scathing attack on politicians, and you know, Paranoid's such an easy, great song, but apparently they wrote it in about 25 minutes, didn't they? And I love like the unusual stuff on the album, like, you know, like Planet Caravan with that thing through the Leslie and the ethereal quality to it. And, you know, I love like Fairies Wear Boots, which is just nuts. But I've gone with Black Sabbath because of what you said. It's the first album, and it's the first album of its type. which takes real balls, to be brutally honest, to be able to be an album that creates a genre is so unusual. I mean, it happens slightly later on with the Wailers, for example, and other artists, but there are not many albums you go, oh, that is a first of its type, you know, and, you know, this does it for me, a bit like the Stooges do. You know, people might say MC5 a little bit earlier on, but I think the Stooges one's much more punk rock than the MC5 were for me. But for this, a bit like James Brown as well, he invented funk, you know, and it's like that with me, with Sabbath and Black Sabbath, the album. And what I used to love is the first track, Black Sabbath. I used to play it when I was in class. I'd teach a class of creative writing, and I would play the first minute. So it was all the rain and all that whoosh and all that coming down, and the guitar, and the kids would be like looking around, going, "What the hell is this?" And I'd say, "Right, you've got 25 minutes now. I want you to come up with some sort of opening paragraph to go with that music. And what do you sort of picture? What do you envisage? Come up with a plan, then do some description on it." It was great. It was a really great little task, and the kids liked it as well, because they weren't expecting anything as doom-ridden or heavy as that, you know. What a great song, what a great album, what a really great album. I don't know why there's a difference of track listing between the Americans and the British version. I don't quite understand it. You know, Nib's great, and I don't think they've got Evil Woman on their version, which I don't quite get. Or they have a slightly different version. But anyway, that's my number 3. It's a tremendous album. What have you got in at number 2, Paul?
It's obviously a case of great minds think alike, because I've got Led Zeppelin 3 at number 2. Could have been number 1, but obviously I'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, and you said, there's not much to say about it. You haven't already said, but it's just a fantastic album. You know, again, the light and shade. You know, as you said, Immigrant Song, just a fantastic. You know, again, you put it on. If you hadn't heard it before, it's like, wow, where did that come from? You know, it's just tremendous. But yeah, I mean, Tangerine, I love Tangerine as well. I love the guitar playing, just a very understated guitar playing in that. And Gallows Pole Away, it just builds up, builds and builds and builds. Since I've been loving you, yeah, absolutely, as you said before, absolute classic. Love the guitar playing on that track as well. And you know, Page is obviously one of the masters when it comes to writing riffs. For me, Out in the Tiles, you know, if you've ever tried to play it, it's just you go, wow, what a genius riff that is. And it was lovely. It's great to play as well. But you know, where did that riff come from? I think along with The Ocean, it's probably one of my favorite riffs that Page wrote. You know, of which there are many. But Out in the Tiles, yeah, I just absolutely love that. You know. But yeah, I mean, you said it all. Really, just a fantastic album. It could easily be number 1. But sneaks in at number 2.
Yeah, my number 2 is John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band. It's, for me, much better than Let It Be, which is a very good album, but not a great Beatles album for me. Whereas the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album is a great album. He recorded simultaneously with Yoko while she was doing her Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band album, and their sleeves are almost identical. If you go and watch it, there's slight little variations on the album sleeve covers. It's very, very subtle. Same musicians and all the rest of it. It features Ringo on drums, Billy Preston on keyboards on occasion, Klaus Voormann, their German friend from the Hamburg days, on bass. And George, at one point, George Harrison visited them and jammed, but didn't get onto the album. I mean, the other thing that I want to comment on is Phil Spector gets far too much credit on this album, because he plays on one track, keyboards, and then he's literally, I think he mixed for about 2 days maximum or something. He's barely there. He was barely there during any of the sessions, and he gets a load of credit for it, which he doesn't deserve. But it's a great album. It really is a great album. It's a dramatic album. It's Lennon's best album for me. You know, he's going through the infamous Primal Scream treatment, where he would, you know, scream and yell and whatever, you know, to sort of remove or deal with moments from his life and the trauma and the death of his mother and the abandonment as being a child as well. So all of these elements come into the album, and they're touched upon previously on other Beatles albums. You know, Julia gets a mention, of course, on the White Album. And the album starts in that way, because it actually starts with a bell toll, which sort of AC/DC do years later, of course, with Back in Black. And it sort of, you know, it could symbolize the death of his mother. Others have read it into the fact that it could be the death of the Beatles, you know, and this, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, the opening song, you know, is, you know, about his mother. It ends with Lennon repeating the phrase, "Mama, don't go, Daddy, come home." It's heartbreakingly sad. I mean, he increases intensity, he starts screaming it by the end. He must have ripped his voice whilst doing that, you know. It's just unbelievable song. Magnificent vocals throughout the whole album. Lennon's such a unique vocal take, and we'll talk about Ozzy earlier on. Ozzy's favorite singer was John Lennon, and Ozzy copied Lennon a lot with double track vocals. Lennon always used to double track because he was so insecure about his voice, which seems nuts when you look at it, because he's got such a unique and distinctive and beautiful voice. And there are some beautiful songs on it, like "Hold On," beautiful song. I love "I Found Out." It's got a great dirty blues vibe to it. "Working Class Hero," everyone knows, that Dylan-esque but almost punk rock type tune in terms of the lyrics. "Isolation," well, great songs. Check them out, absolutely fabulous. God has got the haunting line, "I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me, Yoko and me," and that sort of sums up the end of the Fab Four, doesn't it, really? "My Mummy's Dead," played at the end. It's like with over bookends the album, and it's over the tune of "Three Blind Mice," which is which is odd. I think it's an outstanding album and better than a number of Beatles albums. And I love the Beatles. I just want to put that out there. I absolutely adore the Beatles. And this is better than a number of the Beatles albums. And I think, is it the best solo Beatles album? I'm not sure. It's certainly up there for me. Certainly up there. "Band on the Run" is incredible, as is "Ram" by McCartney. So it's definitely up there. Definitely up there. And may I add, "All Things Must Pass" doesn't make my list. I can't believe it's not on there, but it doesn't, you know. And another great 5-star album, and it don't get in. That's how strong 1970 is for me. So, Paul, that's my number 2. What have you got in at number 1?
Number 1, I've got The Who live at Leeds.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's an album I've had since I was 15. I've actually still got the original vinyl. With most of the inserts still in it. I don't think, not all of them. One or two might have gone astray, but most of it's still there. Sadly, it's a bit crackly to play now. I recently got a turntable after years and years of, you know, just listening to CDs, and really excited to put it back on, but it crackles a lot. So it's just nice to have the album. But I've had that album. I've probably listened to that album more than any other album in my lifetime. I just absolutely love it. I think to me, it's the Who's best album. I think it captures the Who, the essence of them, absolutely down to a T. I'd actually gone off the bonus track version, which
that's fine.
Gone off, because it includes "Heaven and Hell," which I love as a song.
Great.
Endless Soul, just again one of my heroes, and it's just the sound in that album. You know, a lot of people, you know, say live albums are a bit sus when it comes to sound quality. Sound quality in that for an album that was recorded in the 1970s is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. With no overdubs either.
No overdubs. I mean, there are not many mistakes on it. I mean, you can listen to albums by other people, Stones or Led Zeppelin, and people, and you go, you know, Jimmy's missed a note there, but there's not much. You can't really detect many mistakes when you listen to that album. And like you were saying before, a lot of times Townsend's just basically playing rhythm guitar.
Yeah. And
what a sound he gets out of that SG as well. It's incredible. You listen to the opening to Young Man Blues. What an incredible he gets, you know. Again, very different to another SG user in Tony Iommi, but just a fantastic sound. And Endless was more or less playing bass, playing the lead a lot of the time. He just does his own thing on bass, you know. But I mean, I saw the Who not long after that album came out, maybe a year later. I think no, 72. I saw them, I think, for the first time in Glasgow, and I was like 6 rows in the front, and I was just like, I mean, my ticket, I've still got the ticket stub. It was like 75 pence, I think. You know, 6 rows in the front. You could almost reach out and touch the band, and I was just sat with my mouth open the whole time watching them. I was so awestruck by the fact I was actually seeing them in person. But the sound they get on the album. I mean, you mentioned before that the long version of My Generation, which is a kind of medley of things. It reaches a crescendo in the middle of that song where they all hit this big E, and it's just like a wall of noise, absolute wall. And it's just like, how can three? Obviously, there's no singing in that bit, but how can three musicians make such a sound? It sounds like there's so many more people contributing to that recording than they're actually on it. But I just absolutely love that album to bits. You know, if I could only keep one album for the rest of my life, that it would have to be that album. You know, that's the way I kind of decided that would be the #1 album.
Yeah, I just think for me they're just an incredible band. I saw them a number of times, but the most enjoyable gig I ever saw them was in 1999, and we saw them at Shepherd's Bush Empire, and it was the 4 of them plus Rabbit. Rabbit Bundrick on keyboard, so there was a 5-piece, and it was the first time Townshend got rid of all those barriers, just went back to straightforward electric guitar again, one amp on stage, and there's a recording of it. I've actually got the recordings. They released them as CDs for the fan club and stuff, so I've got it. And I played it with my mate a while ago. It's like listening to them in the 70s. There was big jam solos, and they were playing around. I remember the gig I went to, Townshend's guitar stuttered a bit in terms of the amp, and at the end he lost his temper and he smashed the hell out of his guitar in the amp. You know, he went ballistic. It was one of the most incredible gigs I've ever been to. I think it was the night Newcastle Wallet Spurs as well. So we found out maybe we were bouncing up and down at the gig, you know. Yeah. It was an amazing concert, amazing show. That's one of my top 3 gigs of all time. The Who were so special that night. It was like being transported back to the 70s because Endless was all over the place. Zach Stork is an incredible drummer, and Rabbit on keys, but Townshend was immense, and he was leaping through the air and God knows what. He was amazing. It was almost like a last stand before they sort of go down a bit, or before Entwistle's death, unfortunately. Yeah. I
mean, I was lucky enough to see them a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times with the whole band, and then I think I saw them playing in Newcastle, the arena, when I think it was Kenny Jones? I think it was in drums that night. Was it Kenny Jones or was it Zach Starkey?
Zach Stork.
That was the night that Joe Strummer was the support.
Yeah, Zach Stork. Yeah.
Which was good, but no, to me they're just absolutely fantastic. That fantastic band, you know. So definitely my #1 album from 1970. That was why I started off on #1. There's like everything else is going to be.
Yeah. What's next? Well, as I say, if I'd went with the whole version, that would have been my #1 as well. If I'm being honest, with the whole gig, without a doubt. My #1 though is Neil Young, After the Gold Rush, which I just think is a beautiful album. You know, it's majestic, wide range of musicians. It's basically got his band on, as well as bonus musicians. You know, you got Stephen Stills on there, Nils Lofgren, as well as Crazy Horse. You know, like Ralph Molina and you know Danny Whitten and whatever, and Billy Talbot, Jack Nietzsche on keyboards. It's a country folk album. And for me, it's Neil Young's best album. It's a beautiful album about like love and relationships, about relationships blossoming or relationships crumbling. And so you have all of those elements there. You know, Neil Young's fragility at times is absolutely moving. And then you've got this fierceness about him in other songs later on, which I'll talk about, you know, really stands out. So, you know, it starts off beautifully with that Crosby, Stills and Nash sound on Tell Me Why. And then you have the melancholy of Only Love Can Break Your Heart, which I believe he wrote about Graham Nash splitting up with Joni Mitchell. And then you have that fierce element of Southern Man, about the racism and the deep South in America and the prominence of the KKK. You know, biting lyrics, the hard rocking guitar playing. It's really brutal, actually, and quite rightly so. And it really highlights the problems that were going down there at the time in the USA. And then it drops. The whole album changes again in terms of tone. This beautiful calmness of Don't Let It Bring You Down, and the old Don Gibson of Oh Lonesome Me. Then there's beauty of Birds, which is fabulous, you know, and the key line in Birds with this piano, and it's over, and it's like rips at your heart when he sings it's over. It's so melancholic. It's beautiful. And then up tempo again with When You Dance, that Crosby, Stills and Nash harmony sound going on, and I Believe in You, lovely. I Believe in You, a lovely little sort of sentiment there. And then the last song's really whimsical, Cripple Creek Ferry. But it works because it just finishes off the album superbly. And that was my number one. I think it's an incredible album. I really do. I think it's as good an album as you're going to get. And so different. Young's one of those artists, he's done far too many albums. And I've never heard him do a better album than this. He's done some close. And if you get the chance to listen to the live at Massey Hall, I think it's from 71. That's an incredible live album, really brilliant, just superb, really top draw album. Probably tops this actually as an album if people get the chance to go and listen to that. But yeah, my number one, Neil Young, After the Gold Rush. Some albums that we've not mentioned. I mean, Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Oh. Yeah, I was going to say, tell me the albums that nearly made you listen. I'll tell you the ones that nearly made.
Bridge Over Troubled Water. I can't believe I've not got it in. Let It Be wasn't close, to be honest. Moon Dance was close. Yeah, Paranoid was very close. I'm trying to think of it. Sex Machine was close. So there's a few albums I kept looking at the list and I'm not sure. Well, you know, it was really hard to whittle them down. How about yourself?
It was a few I felt guilty about, not because also my musical taste.
Fire and Water as well. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, Ladies of the Canyon, Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big, but I preferred Joni Mitchell when she moved more into the kind of jazzy type thing, when she started playing with Jaco Pastorius and people like that, and I loved that era rather than the early stuff. But right. I think she's an absolutely phenomenal musician. Bridge Over Troubled Water, 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus by Spirit. It's a great album as well.
I don't know that one, right?
No, good album. Spirit are a really good band. Miles Davis, Bitches Brew.
Yeah, that was another one. Yeah, I was unsure how to shoehorn that in.
Well, I mean, I have to be honest with you, that was I never in a million years I listened to that when I was 15 or 16.
Yeah,
listening to it back now, and you see the people that were involved in that band and where they kind of shot off in directions of Weather Report and Return to Forever and Mahavishnu Orchestra, yeah. Just like a real melting pot of stuff, you know. But I didn't make it, but you know, it was very close.
Yeah, there's so many. Deja Vu as well. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young could have made it.
Deja Vu, yeah.
Yeah. There are so many albums. I thought, whoa. Yeah, but yeah, there we have it, folks. There's our selection. Let us know what your thoughts are. There's some really interesting choices there. Colosseum, for example. I would never have thought of that. That's great. I love stuff like here and stuff like that. So if you've subscribed to the channel, please do hit the like button as well. Okay, and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think about our choices. So until the next time when we come back for 1971, which in itself is some year, from Paul and myself, take care and goodbye. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.